So I don't know about you, but the moment I walk into my garage, first thing I hit is shoes. Shoes everywhere, no matter what I've done to try and fix the issue. So now it's time for a permanent solution. Let's get going. So first things first, before I can get in here and take some measurements, I got to get all these shoes out of the way. But before I start any woodworking project, one of the first things that I do, after I take my measurements, of course, is to hop into Fusion 360 and start putting together a 3D mock-up of what I want my project to look like. So let's go ahead and see what I've done. So as you can see here in Fusion 360, I have the mock-up done of what my shoe shelf is going to look like. I have my sides, top, bottom. I have my base that's going to sit on the foundation. I have my front stretcher here on the bottom, top stretcher here on the back, and my shelves spaced out how I think they're going to be. Actually think this might change as we get to building it, but we'll see how it goes. All right, so let's go ahead and get this DIY project started. Did a quick printout of my cut list, so I know exactly what I'm cutting. All right, so first things first, let's go ahead and get some plywood on my Bora Portamate that I have. I think this is the 4x6 version, if I remember correctly. It comes in handy as I don't have a lot of space in my garage. Here I'm using the Festool TS55 track saw, and all I'm doing is ripping off a clean edge before I start marking out my lines for the remainder of my measurements that I have in my cut list. So here I'm just marking some rough guides, because I need to get this plywood broken down before I get it into my garage to start making more of my dimensional cuts for all the panels and shelves that I need. So some of the first set of parts that I'm cutting down the length are the parts for my base. And as you can see, I'm doing that here on the chop saw. So I was so confident here in my mock-up in Fusion 360 that I went on ahead and pre-cut everything for the shoe rack. As for my glue up, what I'm using here is Type On 2. What I'm doing is I'm applying just a little bit to the front edge of this shelf. And then as you'll see, I'm going to clamp on that front lip. What that front lip is going to allow is for the inability for hopefully shoes not to slide off the front of each shelf as they're racked and put at their angle as they're supposed to be. So I had 5 shelves in total that I was doing this for. So basically at this point, it's rinse and repeat. Lay down some glue, put that front edge on. As you can see, I'm using some cheap pine here. So I just applied a clamp, usually into the middle or sometimes on the outside, just to help keep that thing attached until the glue dries. So what I'm doing here is I'm marking where I want my pocket holes to be. Now we are moving on to our base assembly and install. So here I am laying out the parts for my base. Use some scrap 2x4s just to get it done. That's why they're marked up like they are. A little engraving here and there. Just to add a little personal touch. Right now I'm just drilling some pilot holes just to make it easier to screw these 2x4s together, making sure I drill through all the way. Getting some 90-degree square clamps into place to make sure I can at least make this thing as square as possible. I found these clamping squares on Amazon. It was a 4-pack, relatively cheap, made out of aluminum, comparable to the other big red brand that's out there, and I think it was about $30 or $40 for the entirety of the 4-pack, so not that expensive at all. It worked very, very well. Last of all, I'm just measuring for square here. As you can see in my little space here, shoes have already started to collect. So hopefully I can get this project done by the end of the night tonight. Only things we have left to do is install our base in this area, make sure it's nice and level, get our edge banding installed on the outside of the carcass, get our shelves installed, do a little bit of light sanding because we're going to leave it rough. It is garage furniture, so I'm not really worried about it too much, and hopefully get this thing completed tonight. So let's go. All right, so as you can see, we have my garage floor, and then we actually have our poured foundation. And these are actually a separate height from each other. And as you can see, it's a larger height here as compared to here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put the base in. We're gonna get the base level and put the shelf on top of the base. That way we're putting that shelf on a level surface. So what I have is a ton of shims. We're gonna use these shims, see what we can do to get this thing leveled out. Take some scrap 2x4s, screw them in the back once we get this leveled out, and that'll give us our base support. So hopefully that makes sense. All right, first things first, what we're gonna do is we're gonna scribe out where our studs are. I know my studs right here because I can see 2 stud screws. So all I'm gonna do is just draw a little line here. And I see screws here. Draw a little line there. I'm gonna go ahead and drill 2 pilot holes. And get some screws installed to mount this thing to the wall. And yes, I know it did just use a masonry bit, but it's all I had that was long enough. Now I'm just screwing in some 3.5-inch lag screws that I had just to get this base supported to the wall behind the shelf. All right, pretty level. Let's get to the next step. All right, so now we're finally on the edge banding. Got my nice little edge banding heater that I found here on Amazon. I'll put the link in the description below. Works pretty well. Got my birch edge banding, and I got my profile cutter. In case you're wondering, all I'm doing is clamping this to my MFT table so it stands upright, so it's a lot easier to do the edge banding. All right, so I'm having a little trouble. So just to keep the edge banding on straight as I start out, grabbed a couple of my Rockler bandy clamps. We're gonna go about 1/3 of the way down. I'm gonna go ahead and clamp this edge banding down just so it stays in place and doesn't move on me as I'm getting it glued down here. Never used this one before. Man, that was stuck. Holy mackerel. All right, let's get going. I will say, as I've gotten more and more into this DIY hobby, the more I realize that it pays to have the right tool for the job. Just let the iron do the work. So now we're finally to the fun part, and that's getting this cabinet carcass put together. I don't really have much of a workbench, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lay it out on my nice polished concrete floor that we have. The two parts that I'm laying out currently are the top of the shelf and one of the side supports. As you can see, I'm using my handy dandy clamping squares once again to keep these two parts as square as possible as I start to drill in my screws for my pocket holes. Off camera, I got the other side clamped up and went ahead and started drilling in my screws for my pocket holes to make sure everything was secure as possible. I think pocket holes are very underrated. They can be used for a lot of projects for the home DIYer. All right, so what I'm doing here is I'm actually putting in a back stretcher. What that back stretcher is going to give me is just a little bit of back support as I start to lean this thing up and off the ground. Pocket holes for the win, baby. So one thing I forgot to take into account during my mock-up was the light switch and the garage door opener. So after taking some quick measurements and sketching out both the light switch and the garage door opener box on the right side of my garage shoe shelf, what I did is grab my Forstner bit so I can drill a pretty quick pilot hole before I get started on the actual jigsaw work for this. In case you were wondering, I did have a backer board in place here to keep any blowout from happening on the backside after I drilled through the plywood. All right, so now we're finally ready to mount our shelves. So what I'm gonna do to get the angle consistent across all 5 shelves is I'm gonna use a bevel square. And I'm gonna take that bevel square, and I've already set my angle, and I want my angle to be 20 degrees. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to go ahead and pre-mark all the bottom of the shelves where they're supposed to be, as I want them to be spaced out. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna line my bevel square up along that mark on each line, and that should give me consistent results across all 5 shelves. For the bottoms of my shelves, 12 inches apart. So it's gonna be 12, 24, 36. And then what I'll do is I'll flip it over, and I'll mark 12, 24, 36. Line my bevel square up to the very bottom where it touches the point that I made. And I draw my line. Because I pre-cut everything, I was a little nervous that everything was going to fit correctly. But luckily everything did, and I didn't have to make any adjustments as I kept moving forward. All right, so we finally got her all built. Now we're going to do everybody's favorite thing in the whole world, sand for the next hour to 2 hours. So the last thing we're going to do is we're going to apply a nice little simple stain just to protect the wood from any damage from wet shoes, mud, stuff like that. So here we go. So this was a fun one. Just remember, not everything you build's got to be super fancy. Sometimes it just has to be functional. And that's exactly what this bookshelf, or this shoe shelf for us in this case is. It's functional. It's in the garage, it holds shoes, looks halfway decent. So for me, it's a win. Remember, if you like this video, click the like button. If you want to see more, click subscribe. I do have some more content coming out soon. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Nick Does DIY. Until next time.